A trembling flight attendant, Vanessa Lewis, stares in horror at Raymond Jackson's business card, Executive Director, Skyline Airlines. Just minutes ago, she'd refused him water while serving white passengers. Now, 30,000 feet above ground, her career hangs in the balance. Before we dive into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever witnessed or experienced discrimination in customer service. The choices we make in a single moment can change our entire future, as Vanessa is about to discover. Raymond Jackson wasn't supposed to be on Flight SL-347 from Los Angeles to New York. As executive director of Skyline Airlines, he typically planned his travel schedule weeks in advance. But when his diversity and inclusion conference in Los Angeles ran long, where he'd been the keynote speaker, no less, he found himself booking a last-minute seat to make it back for tomorrow's critical board presentation. At 42, Raymond had climbed to heights few black executives in the aviation industry ever reached. His journey from the south side of Chicago to the boardroom had been anything but easy. Raised by a single mother who worked 3 jobs to keep their small apartment, Raymond learned early that he'd need to be twice as good to get half as far. His exceptional grades earned him a full scholarship to Northwestern, followed by an MBA from Harvard, where he was one of only 7 black students in his cohort. Every step up the corporate ladder had been a battle against subtle and not-so-subtle discrimination. There was the time he'd suggested the exact same marketing strategy as his white colleague Tim, only to be ignored until Tim repeated it 10 minutes later to enthusiastic approval. Or the countless instances of being mistaken for janitorial staff despite wearing custom-tailored suits. Or being asked to present his ID and boarding pass 3 times while white executives walked through with a nod. Now, as one of the highest-ranking black executives in any major airline, Raymond was about to present his most ambitious initiative yet, a complete overhaul of Skyline's hiring, training, and customer service protocols to address systemic bias. The data he'd compiled was irrefutable. Minority passengers reported significantly lower satisfaction scores, and the company's workforce diversity lagged far behind industry standards. The presentation stored on his laptop could change everything. If approved, Skyline would become the first major airline to acknowledge and actively address racial disparities in both customer experience and employment opportunities. After 2 intensive days of speaking and networking at the conference, Raymond hadn't had time to change out of his casual clothes, dark jeans, a navy polo, and comfortable loafers, before rushing to catch SL-347. It was the first time in years he'd flown without his usual impeccable suit and tie. Flight attendant Vanessa Lewis had been with Skyline for 12 years. At 35, the blonde former homecoming queen from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, prided herself on providing exceptional service to first-class passengers. She'd specifically requested the premium cabin assignments, enjoying the proximity to what she considered successful people, and the higher tips they often provided. When Raymond boarded among the first-class passengers, Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly. Her smile remained fixed, but it didn't reach her eyes as it had for the previous passengers. In her mind, she wondered if perhaps he'd been upgraded or used points. He certainly didn't fit her mental image of a typical first-class traveler. "Seat?" she asked Raymond curtly, without the warm "welcome aboard" she'd offered to previous passengers. "For A," Raymond replied with the practiced patience of someone used to such treatment. As Raymond settled into his first-class window seat, he noticed the subtle shift in posture from the white businessman in 4B. Bradley Thompson, a 50-something investment banker in an expensive suit, instinctively moved his arm from the shared armrest and angled his body slightly away. Raymond had experienced this countless times before, the physical distancing, the subtle reclaiming of space as if his presence constituted an invasion. He focused on his breathing, reminding himself of the importance of tomorrow's presentation. He couldn't afford to let the familiar slights affect his concentration. The boarding process continued around them, with Bradley receiving a warm greeting and drink offer from Vanessa before takeoff, while Raymond's presence was conspicuously unacknowledged. When Raymond stored his laptop bag, Vanessa quickly approached. "Sir, "We need to make sure that's completely under the seat," she said with an edge to her voice, despite the bag already being properly stowed. Meanwhile, Bradley's briefcase, which protruded slightly into the aisle, went unmentioned. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Raymond opened his laptop to review his presentation one final time. The slides detailed the comprehensive changes needed throughout Skyline. From revised hiring practices to customer service protocols designed to ensure equal treatment of all passengers. The irony wasn't lost on Raymond as he felt Bradley's sidelong glances at his screen. The investment banker seemed surprised by the sophisticated data analysis and executive summary displayed on Raymond's laptop. "That's interesting work," Bradley commented, his tone suggesting surprise. "Are you in consulting?" "Something like that," Raymond replied with a slight smile, choosing not to reveal his position. Years of experience had taught him that people behaved differently once they knew his title, and he preferred to observe authentic interactions when possible. Bradley nodded and returned to his financial magazine, apparently satisfied with his assumption that Raymond was perhaps a junior consultant rather than an executive at his level. Raymond continued working, ignoring the periodic glances from other first-class passengers who seemed to find his presence unusual. Tomorrow's presentation would address exactly these kinds of implicit biases, the subtle looks, the assumptions, the differential treatment that created entirely different air travel experiences depending on the color of one's skin. Little did he know that this flight would provide him with the most powerful case study of all. 2 hours into the 5-hour flight, Raymond's throat felt like sandpaper. He delivered a 90-minute keynote speech at the conference, participated in 3 panel discussions, and barely had time to grab a quick coffee before rushing to the airport. Now, dehydrated and focused intently on his presentation, he desperately needed water. Raymond pressed the call button above his seat. The soft ding echoed, and the button illuminated. He watched as Vanessa emerged from the galley, scanned the cabin, made eye contact with him, and then deliberately turned her attention to another passenger who had not called for service. "Can I get you anything else, Mr. Hendricks?" she asked a gray-haired white man across the aisle with a warm smile. "I'm fine, thank you, Vanessa," the man replied, using her name from her prominently displayed name tag. Raymond waited patiently, assuming she would attend to his call button next. Instead, Vanessa disappeared back into the galley without acknowledgement. Perhaps she hadn't realized the call came from his seat, he reasoned, giving her the benefit of the doubt. 5 minutes passed. Raymond pressed the call button again. This time, Vanessa emerged with a tray of drinks she hadn't been carrying before. She served Bradley first. "Your scotch on the rocks, Mr. Thompson," she said with practiced elegance. "Thank you, dear," Bradley replied, accepting the drink with a smile that Vanessa warmly returned. She continued serving other passengers in the first-class cabin, methodically working her way through everyone except Raymond. His illuminated call button remained the only one lit in the cabin. After serving the last passenger, a white woman who hadn't even requested anything, Vanessa turned off Raymond's call button from the galley panel without addressing his needs and disappeared again. Raymond's mouth felt increasingly dry. He'd been taught from childhood to remain composed in the face of discrimination, to never show anger or frustration that could feed into stereotypes about black men. But after giving an entire conference presentation on the importance of calling out systematic discrimination, the irony of silently accepting it now felt unbearable. He pressed the call button a 3rd time. When Vanessa emerged looking visibly annoyed, Raymond raised his hand slightly to ensure she knew exactly who was calling. She approached with a tight smile that looked more like a grimace. "Yes?" she asked, her tone clipped. "May I please have some water?" Raymond asked politely. Vanessa's response came without hesitation, "You'll have to wait, we're serving priority passengers first." The cabin went momentarily quiet. Bradley Thompson shifted uncomfortably beside Raymond, suddenly very interested in the ice cubes in his scotch. "Priority passengers?" Raymond echoed, his voice level despite the obvious implication. "Yes," Vanessa replied curtly. "I'll get to you when I can." She turned and walked away before Raymond could respond. Raymond sat in stunned silence. In all his years of flying, even before he became an executive, he'd never heard the term, priority passengers, used to describe some first-class passengers over others. Everyone in first class paid premium prices specifically for priority service. Around him, other passengers averted their eyes, the awkwardness palpable. Bradley took a long sip of his drink, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to say anything. In that moment, Raymond felt the weight of a familiar decision. Speak up and risk being labeled difficult or aggressive, or remain silent and accept the unacceptable. He thought about his presentation sitting open on his laptop, the one arguing that meaningful change required courage from everyone witnessing discrimination. Discreetly, he pulled out his phone and switched it to airplane mode. Using the Notes app, he documented the incident in detail, including the exact words Vanessa had used and the timestamps. If he was going to address this, he would need to be precise and factual. 30 minutes passed. Bradley received a refill on his scotch without asking. The passenger across the aisle was offered a warm cookie. The woman in the row ahead was asked if she wanted another pillow. Raymond's call button remained untouched, his request for water unfulfilled. He found himself remembering countless similar moments throughout his life and career. Being ignored at high-end stores while sales associates helped white customers who arrived after him, waiting longer for service at restaurants, being scrutinized more closely during routine transactions. Each individual incident seemed small in isolation, easy to dismiss as a misunderstanding or coincidence. But the pattern over a lifetime was undeniable and exhausting. Raymond watched as Vanessa chatted comfortably with Bradley about his connecting flight to London, offering him tips about the best lounge to visit during his layover. Her warmth and attentiveness with white passengers made the contrast in her treatment of Raymond even more stark. When she finished her conversation with Bradley, Raymond raised his hand again, determined to remain calm but persistent. "Excuse me," he said. "I still haven't received any water." Vanessa's smile vanished. "We're very busy with service. As I mentioned, you'll need to be patient. Everyone else in first class has been served multiple times," Raymond pointed out quietly. "Are you suggesting something?" Vanessa asked, her tone defensive and slightly louder than necessary, drawing attention from nearby passengers. "I'm simply requesting water," Raymond replied evenly. Bradley, finally seeming to recognize the unfairness of the situation, cleared his throat. "I don't need another drink if you're busy. Maybe you could get him some water." Vanessa's expression flickered with annoyance at Bradley's suggestion. "I'll be back with water when I complete the service," she said firmly before walking away again. Raymond met Bradley's eyes briefly, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Bradley looked embarrassed but quickly returned his attention to his magazine. Another flight attendant, Angela Wilson, had been observing the interactions from the galley. Unlike Vanessa, Angela had noticed the pattern of selective service. As Vanessa returned to the galley, Angela quietly poured a glass of water and started to head toward Raymond's seat. "What are you doing?" Vanessa whispered sharply. "He asked for water a while ago," Angela replied. "I'm handling my section," Vanessa insisted, taking the water from Angela's hand and placing it back on the counter. "He can wait his turn like everyone else." Angela frowned but didn't push the issue further, though her discomfort was evident. As the flight continued, Raymond remained composed, documenting each interaction meticulously on his phone. This wasn't just about him anymore. Tomorrow's presentation would include recommendations for anonymous customer experience audits, and he was experiencing exactly why they were necessary. After nearly an hour of waiting, as the flight attendants prepared for the initial descent into New York, Raymond finally received a glass of water. Vanessa placed it on his tray table without a word, avoiding eye contact as she moved on immediately. "Thank you," Raymond said, his voice steady despite his frustration. Vanessa paused, then turned back with a tight smile. "Some people need to learn patience," she said, just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. We can't all be treated like we're special. The implication hung in the air. Bradley Thompson shifted uncomfortably in his seat again, pretending to be absorbed in the safety card he'd already read twice. Raymond took a sip of his water, considering his next move carefully. Throughout his career, he'd learned that documentation and proper channels were far more effective than emotional confrontations. As the executive director of Skyline, he had a responsibility not just to himself but to every passenger who might face similar treatment. "May I have your employee number and full name, please?" Raymond asked calmly. Vanessa's expression shifted from smug to defensive. "Why would you need that?" she asked, her voice rising slightly. "I'd like to provide feedback about my experience today," Raymond replied, maintaining his composure. "Is there a problem?" Vanessa's tone turned challenging. "I've been providing service to a full cabin. We can't all drop everything because one person thinks they deserve immediate attention." A few passengers turned to watch the exchange, discomfort evident on their faces. "I'm simply requesting your employee information," Raymond said. "I believe it's standard procedure for passengers to be able to provide feedback about their flight experience." Vanessa's cheeks flushed. "You're playing the race card, aren't you? Just because you didn't get water the exact second you wanted it." The cabin grew silent. Angela Wilson, who had been collecting trash nearby, stopped mid-motion, her eyes widening at Vanessa's outburst. Raymond remained calm, his expression neutral despite the accusation. "I haven't mentioned race. I'm requesting your employee information, which I believe you're required to provide upon request." Vanessa glared at him for a moment, then reluctantly pointed to her name tag. "Vanessa Lewis. Employee number 38792. Go ahead and complain. Nothing will come of it." Raymond wrote down the information in his notes app, thanked her politely, and returned to his presentation while Vanessa stormed back to the galley. Have you ever witnessed someone abuse their position of power like Vanessa did? Or perhaps you've been treated unfairly in a customer service situation? Comment number 1 if you believe Raymond handled the situation correctly by remaining calm and documenting the incident. Hit the like button if you think Bradley should have spoken up sooner when he witnessed the discrimination happening right beside him. Subscribe to follow this story to its shocking conclusion. What do you think will happen when the plane lands? Will Raymond's complaint simply disappear into the corporate void, or is Vanessa about to face unexpected consequences? In the galley, Angela approached Vanessa with concern. "That was unnecessary," she said quietly. "He just asked for water." "Oh, please," Vanessa rolled her eyes. "These people are always looking for something to complain about. They think everything is racism." "These people?" Angela repeated, raising an eyebrow. "You know what I mean," Vanessa said dismissively. "The ones who are always looking for special treatment. Trust me, nothing will come of his complaint. I've been with this airline for 12 years. Angela glanced out at the cabin, noticing Raymond quietly working on his laptop. "I don't know, Vanessa. He seems like he might be someone important." "Important people don't dress like that," Vanessa scoffed. "If he were actually important, he would have mentioned it. They always do." As the plane began its descent into JFK International Airport, Raymond made a phone call using the airplane's Wi-Fi. From her position in the galley, Vanessa noticed him speaking quietly but intently into his phone. A flicker of unease passed through her, but she quickly dismissed it. Passengers complained all the time, especially those who thought they deserved special treatment. The company almost always sided with the flight attendants, especially senior ones like herself. The plane touched down smoothly, and as passengers began to gather their belongings, Vanessa's company phone buzzed with a message. She pulled it from her pocket, expecting the usual arrival information. Instead, the message read, "Urgent, report to gate service desk immediately upon deplaning." David Chen, customer service manager, Vanessa felt the first real twinge of anxiety. Direct summons from management immediately after landing were extremely rare. She glanced toward Raymond's seat, but he was already standing, retrieving his laptop bag from under the seat. "What's wrong?" Angela asked, noticing Vanessa's expression. "Nothing," Vanessa said quickly, tucking the phone away. "Just need to check in with management after we land." As passengers filed out, Vanessa maintained her professional smile, thanking each person as they deplaned. When Raymond approached the exit, she avoided eye contact, focusing instead on the passengers behind him. Once the cabin was empty, Vanessa quickly completed her post-flight checks and hurried down the jet bridge toward the gate, a sense of dread building with each step. When Vanessa arrived at the gate's service desk, her supervisor David Chen was waiting with an unusually grave expression. At 47, David had been with Skyline for over 20 years and was known for his fair but firm management style. "Vanessa," he greeted her without his usual warmth. "We need to talk privately. Now." She followed him to the small office behind the service desk, her heart pounding. "What's this about?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "I have a tight connection for my next flight." "You've been removed from the schedule for today," David said, closing the door behind them. "We've received a serious complaint about your service on flight SL 347. Vanessa's defenses immediately activated. "A complaint? From that man in 4A? David," he was being unreasonable. "I was managing a full service, and he expected immediate attention." "Vanessa," David interrupted, "this is not a minor complaint. This passenger has reported discriminatory treatment, with multiple witnesses corroborating his account." "Discriminatory?" Vanessa's voice rose. "That's ridiculous. I treat all passengers the same." "He's just playing the office door opened, cutting her off mid-sentence. Vanessa turned, expecting another manager or perhaps HR. Instead, Raymond Jackson entered, now wearing an executive badge on a Skyline lanyard. He carried a leather portfolio embossed with the Skyline logo and his company laptop. Vanessa's words died in her throat as the blood drained from her face. "Ms. Lewis," David said formally, "this is Raymond Jackson, Executive Director of Operations for Skyline Airlines and member of the executive leadership team." Raymond nodded politely, his expression professional but serious. "Ms. Lewis," he acknowledged. Vanessa stared in shock, her mind racing to process this revelation. The passenger she deliberately ignored, the man she'd refused water while serving everyone around him, the person she'd dismissed as unimportant was actually one of the highest-ranking executives in the entire company. I didn't." She stammered. "You didn't know who I was," Raymond completed her thought. "That's exactly the problem, Ms. Lewis. No passenger should be treated the way you treated me today, regardless of who they are or what position they hold." David gestured for everyone to sit. "Mr. Jackson has provided documentation of the incident, including timestamps of his repeated requests for water and your responses." Raymond opened his portfolio and placed his notes on the desk. "I pressed the call button 3 times over the course of an hour before receiving water," he explained calmly. "During that time, I observed you serve the white passengers around me multiple times, including offering items they hadn't requested." "That's not." "I didn't," Vanessa struggled to find words. "It was a busy flight. I was handling service in order of priority passengers," Raymond quoted her exact words. "That was the term you used when I asked why I hadn't received water while everyone around me had been served multiple times." Vanessa's face flushed. "I didn't mean it that way. You're taking it out of context." "We also have statements from other passengers," David added, sliding several forms across the desk. "Passengers in 4B, 3A, and 5C all noted the discrepancy in service." Vanessa scanned the forms with growing horror. Bradley Thompson's statement was particularly detailed, noting that he'd received 3 beverage services while the passenger next to him received none despite multiple requests. "I'm not racist," Vanessa insisted, her voice cracking. "I would have treated any passenger the same way if they were being demanding during a busy service." Requesting water once per hour is hardly demanding, Raymond pointed out. And the pattern of who received prompt service versus who was ignored speaks for itself. The office door opened again, and Angela Wilson entered, looking uncomfortable. "You called her?" Vanessa asked, feeling betrayed. "Ms. Wilson was also working first class today," David explained. "We need her account as well." Angela avoided Vanessa's eyes. "I saw Mr. Jackson press his call button multiple times," she confirmed quietly. "I noticed you skipping him during service, and when I tried to bring him water, you stopped me." "You don't understand," Vanessa protested, tears forming in her eyes. "It wasn't about his race. I just thought he was being difficult." "Why did you perceive him as difficult?" Raymond asked, his tone genuinely inquisitive rather than accusatory. "What specific behaviors led you to that conclusion?" Vanessa opened her mouth to respond but found she had no answer that wouldn't incriminate her further. David cleared his throat. "Vanessa, based on the evidence presented, I'm placing you on immediate administrative leave pending a full investigation. Please surrender your company ID and credentials before you leave." "You're suspending me?" Vanessa whispered, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. "Over a glass of water?" "This isn't about water," Raymond said quietly. "This is about a pattern of behavior that resulted in discriminatory service. The kind of behavior that Skyline Airlines cannot and will not tolerate." As Vanessa handed over her ID badge with trembling hands, the gravity of her actions finally began to register. She had jeopardized her entire 12-year career through actions she had somehow justified to herself as normal, as acceptable, as merely prioritizing certain passengers over others. But the evidence laid out before her made it impossible to maintain that fiction any longer. Vanessa drove home in tears, her hands shaking on the steering wheel of her Honda Civic. 12 years with Skyline, gone in an instant. The drive from JFK to her apartment in Queens felt interminable as she replayed the day's events in her mind, searching for a way to justify her actions. She called her best friend and fellow flight attendant, Melissa, the moment she parked. "They suspended me, Mel," she sobbed into the phone. "For supposedly discriminating against a passenger." "What? That's crazy. You're the most professional FA I know," Melissa responded. "What happened?" As Vanessa recounted the story, she found herself unconsciously editing details, omitting how she'd repeatedly ignored Raymond's requests while serving white passengers, downplaying her priority passengers comment, casting herself as the victim of an oversensitive passenger looking for problems. "Wait," Melissa interrupted. "You're saying the passenger turned out to be Raymond Jackson?" "The Raymond Jackson, executive director. You know him?" Vanessa asked, surprised. "Everyone in corporate knows him. He's been featured in Airline Business Monthly twice for his diversity initiatives. He started as a baggage handler and worked his way up through every department. The CEO practically hand-picked him for the executive team." Vanessa fell silent, the carefully constructed narrative she'd been building crumbling further. Melissa continued, her voice gentler now, "did you really ignore his requests for water while serving everyone else?" The direct question hung in the air. I didn't think of it that way at the time," Vanessa finally admitted. "He just didn't seem like he belonged in first class." The word sounded awful the moment they left her mouth. Didn't belong. Based on what? His casual clothes? His skin color? Vanessa's stomach churned as she confronted thoughts she'd never articulated so plainly before. "Oh, Vanessa," Melissa sighed. That's not good." As Vanessa entered her apartment, memories from her childhood in Cedar Rapids flooded back, growing up in a town that was 96% white, where her exposure to people of different races had been limited to television and the occasional family that never seemed to stay long. Her parents' subtle comments about those people moving into a nearby neighborhood. The unspoken but clear message that certain people belonged in certain places, and others did not. She'd never considered herself racist. She had black colleagues. She'd voted for Obama. She treated everyone with basic politeness. But now, forced to examine her actions objectively, she couldn't deny the pattern. When faced with a black man in first class, she had automatically assumed he didn't belong, that he wasn't a priority passenger like the white travelers around him. Meanwhile, across the city in the gleaming Skyline headquarters near Bryant Park, Raymond Jackson prepared for his presentation to the board. Despite the morning's disturbing incident, or perhaps because of it, he felt more determined than ever to implement the changes outlined in his proposal. "Are you sure you want to go ahead with the presentation today?" asked Gabriela Santos, Skyline's newly appointed Chief Diversity Officer. "No one would blame you for postponing after what happened." "On the contrary," Raymond replied, organizing his materials. "What happened this morning is exactly why this initiative can't wait another day." His presentation to the board was scheduled for 2 p.m., giving the HR department time to begin their investigation into the incident. By noon, they had already collected statements from Bradley Thompson and 2 other passengers who had witnessed Vanessa's behavior, as well as Angela Wilson's formal account. The preliminary report landed in Raymond's email just as he was reviewing his final slides. The subject line read, "Confidential, Initial Findings, Flight SL 347 Incident." The report confirmed what Raymond already knew: multiple witnesses had corroborated his account of discriminatory treatment. Flight logs showed his call button had been activated 3 times over a 57-minute period. The cabin service record indicated beverages had been served to other first-class passengers during this time. Most damning was Angela Wilson's statement, which included Vanessa's galley comment about, "These people always looking for something to complain about." As Raymond read through the evidence, he felt no satisfaction, only a deep weariness. This incident was merely one visible manifestation of the invisible barriers and biases that his initiative sought to address. Back in Queens, Vanessa's phone buzzed with a text from her sister Heather. "Just saw something on Twitter about a Skyline flight attendant suspended for refusing service to a black executive. Please tell me that wasn't you." Vanessa's blood ran cold. She quickly opened Twitter to find the story already gaining traction. Someone, likely a passenger, had posted, "Just witnessed blatant discrimination on at Skyline Air flight. FA refused water to black man in first class while serving everyone else. Turns out he was an executive. Hashtag flying while black, hashtag Skyline bias." The post had hundreds of retweets already, with commenters sharing their own experiences of discrimination on flights. In a panic, Vanessa created an anonymous account and posted her version of events. "As a flight attendant, we have to manage service efficiently. No discrimination on that at Skyline Air flight, just a demanding passenger expecting special treatment. Media won't tell that side." Her defensive post only fueled the growing controversy, with replies quickly pointing out that requesting water once per hour hardly constituted demanding special treatment. By afternoon, as Raymond delivered his presentation to the board, the incident had been picked up by several travel blogs and was trending on Twitter. Skyline's public relations team was in crisis mode, preparing statements and monitoring the online conversation. In the boardroom, Raymond stood before Skyline's executive leadership team and board of directors. The room fell silent as he began his presentation. "Ladies and gentlemen, the initiative I'm presenting today wasn't born in a conference room or crafted by consultants. It emerged from real experiences, including one that happened to me personally just this morning on one of our own flights." He recounted the incident briefly, without emotion or embellishment, using it to illustrate the larger pattern his data revealed. Minority passengers consistently reported lower satisfaction scores across all aspects of the Skyline experience. "This isn't about one flight attendant or one incident," Raymond explained. "It's about a system that allows these incidents to occur without adequate prevention, detection, or correction." His presentation outlined comprehensive changes: revised hiring practices to increase diversity among flight crews, mandatory bias training for all customer-facing staff, anonymous audits of passenger experiences, and clear accountability measures for discriminatory behavior. The board members listened intently, visibly affected by Raymond's personal experience that morning. By the end of the presentation, there was unanimous support for implementing the initiative immediately, with several board members suggesting even more aggressive measures than Raymond had proposed. As Raymond left the boardroom, his phone buzzed with a notification. Bradley Thompson, the passenger who had sat next to him, had come forward publicly with his account of the incident, stating, "I regret not speaking up sooner when I witnessed the discriminatory treatment of Mr. Jackson. My silence made me complicit, and I'm sharing my experience now to encourage others to act when they see injustice." The story was no longer just about Vanessa Lewis or Raymond Jackson. It had become a catalyst for a broader conversation about race, privilege, and responsibility in everyday interactions. A week after the incident, Raymond sat in the sunlit kitchen of his Westchester home, cradling a cup of coffee as he discussed the ongoing situation with his wife, Diana. Their teenage children, Zoe and Elijah, had gone upstairs after dinner, but not before peppering their father with questions about the incident that had now made national news. "How do you feel about being the center of this story?" Diana asked, covering his hand with hers. A pediatric surgeon with her own experiences of discrimination in medicine, she understood the complex emotions her husband was navigating. "Honestly? Conflicted," Raymond admitted. "On one hand, it's bringing attention to exactly the issues my initiative addresses. On the other hand, you've become the story instead of the changes you're trying to implement," Diana finished for him. Raymond nodded. "Exactly. And the focus on punishing Vanessa Lewis misses the larger point. It's not just about one flight attendant's actions, it's about the system that made those actions possible, even acceptable." Diana sipped her tea thoughtfully. "What did Zoe ask you earlier? About whether the flight attendant should be fired?" "She wanted to know if I was going to use my power to make an example of Vanessa," Raymond said with a sigh. "I told her that real change doesn't come from punishment alone." "The conversation we've been having with the kids for years," Diana murmured. "About having to be twice as good. To get half as far," Raymond completed the familiar phrase they'd both grown up hearing. "But I don't want that for Zoe and Elijah. I want a world where they're judged by their character and contributions, not constantly fighting against assumptions about who they are or where they belong." The weight of this responsibility, to create meaningful change not just for their children but for everyone facing similar barriers, had driven Raymond's career choices. From his first job loading baggage to his current executive role, he'd always viewed his success as both personal achievement and collective responsibility. "What are you going to do about Vanessa Lewis?" Diana asked, knowing her husband well enough to recognize he was formulating a plan. "Something unexpected," Raymond replied, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "Something that might actually create lasting change." Across the city in her small Queens apartment, Vanessa Lewis sat alone on her couch, scrolling through the seemingly endless social media posts about the Skyline incident. She'd stopped reading the comments after the third death threat. How had her life imploded so completely in just 1 week? The investigation was proceeding quickly, with HR conducting additional interviews and reviewing flight records. Vanessa had already received formal notice that termination was being considered as a potential outcome. Her phone rang, her sister Heather, the third call today. "I'm not in the mood to talk," Vanessa answered flatly. "Tough," Heather replied. "We need to have a conversation about what happened." "I've already told you. It wasn't about race. I was just..." "Vanessa," Heather interrupted firmly, "I love you, but I need you to listen right now instead of defending yourself. You discriminated against that man. Maybe you didn't consciously think, I'm going to treat him poorly because he's black, but your actions spoke for themselves." "You weren't there," Vanessa protested weakly. "I didn't need to be there. I've seen how you react to people who don't fit your image of successful or important. Remember when my friend Marcus came to dinner? You assumed he was a delivery person rather than a neurosurgeon. Vanessa fell silent, the memory washing over her. She had indeed answered the door and immediately asked, "Where are the bags?" before realizing her mistake. Or the time we were shopping and you insisted on speaking to a real manager, when the black woman told you they couldn't accept your expired coupon, Heather continued. These aren't isolated incidents, Van. They're a pattern. Tears slid down Vanessa's cheeks as her sister's words penetrated the defensive wall she'd built. So what are you saying? That I'm some kind of horrible racist? That I deserve to lose everything I've worked for? I'm saying you have biases that you've never examined, Heather said more gently. We all do. The difference is whether we recognize them and work to change them, or deny them and keep hurting people. As they talked into the night, Vanessa began the painful process of honest self-reflection. She thought about how she selected which passengers to serve first, the assumptions she made based on appearances, the subtle ways she'd categorized people as more or less deserving of her attention and care. I don't know how to fix this, she finally admitted. Even if by some miracle I keep my job, how do I change thoughts I didn't even know I was having? Have you ever had to confront your own biases or witness someone else going through that difficult process? Comment number 1: If you believe people can truly change their prejudiced views when confronted with their impact. Hit that like button if you think Raymond is right to focus on systemic change rather than just punishing one individual. Subscribe to see how this confrontation transforms into an unexpected opportunity for both Raymond and Vanessa. The question now is, what would you do in Raymond's position? Would you use your power to make an example of someone who discriminated against you, or would you find a different path forward? The next morning, Raymond received the final investigation report from HR. The findings were unequivocal. Vanessa Lewis had violated multiple company policies regarding equal treatment of passengers, had demonstrated biased behavior, and had made statements to colleagues that indicated prejudicial attitudes. The report included a recommendation for termination, citing the severity of the incident, the public relations impact, and the clear evidence from multiple witnesses. Raymond studied the report carefully, thinking about the broader implications of how the company handled this high-profile case. Tomorrow, he would need to sign off on the final decision regarding Vanessa's employment before presenting the full diversity initiative implementation plan to the board. As he considered his options, he remembered his old mentor, Captain James Washington, one of the first black commercial airline pilots who had faced discrimination far worse than anything Raymond had experienced. Captain Washington had always emphasized education over punishment when possible. Firing someone just creates another person with resentment, the captain had told him once. Teaching someone creates an ally. And we need all the allies we can get. Raymond picked up his phone and called Gabriela Santos. Gabriela, I've been thinking about the Lewis case and how it connects to our broader initiative, he began. I'd like to discuss an alternative approach. Raymond sat in his corner office on the 42nd floor of Skyline headquarters, reviewing the final decision paperwork for Vanessa Lewis's case. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan that usually inspired him, but today his focus remained on the documents before him. The investigation had concluded with a clear recommendation for termination. The evidence was irrefutable, the company's zero-tolerance policy for discrimination unambiguous. From a purely procedural standpoint, the decision was straightforward. And yet, Raymond found himself returning to a question that had haunted him since the incident: what outcome would create the most meaningful, lasting change? He thought back to his earliest days at Skyline, when he'd worked as a customer service agent at the Newark airport. His supervisor then, an older black woman named Eleanor, had caught him making a mistake on a passenger's reservation. Rather than writing him up, she'd taken him aside and said, "I'm going to show you how to fix this, and then you're going to train the rest of the team on avoiding this error." We learn more from teaching than from punishment. That lesson had shaped Raymond's leadership philosophy throughout his career. He picked up his phone and dialed Gabriela Santos's extension. "I've been thinking about your suggestion," he said when she answered. "About transformation rather than termination. And Gabriella asked. I think you're right. Firing Vanessa Lewis might satisfy calls for justice, but it does nothing to address the systemic issues. It would be a moment of accountability without lasting impact. So what are you proposing instead? Gabriella's interest was piqued. Something more challenging, for her and for us, Raymond explained. A path that requires genuine accountability, education, and transformation. As they discussed the details of his plan, Raymond felt increasingly confident in his decision. This approach aligned perfectly with the broader initiative he'd been developing for months. It's unorthodox, Gabriella admitted when he finished outlining his proposal. But it could be powerful if she's genuinely willing to do the work. That will be the test, Raymond agreed. Termination is easy, for us, not for her. This alternative requires commitment from everyone involved. After finalizing the details with Gabriella and securing approval from legal and HR, Raymond sent the formal notification. Vanessa Lewis was to report to headquarters the following morning for a final decision meeting. Across the city, Vanessa received the email with trembling hands. She'd been expecting it, but seeing the official summons still sent a wave of nausea through her body. After a week of administrative leave, tomorrow would determine the fate of her career. She immediately called her lawyer, a family friend who had agreed to represent her. They've scheduled the decision meeting for tomorrow at 10 a.m., she told him, her voice cracking. That's actually good news, her lawyer, Michael Green, replied. If they were definitely terminating you, they would likely do it by certified letter to avoid any confrontation. So you think there's hope? Vanessa asked, barely daring to believe it. I think there's a possibility they're considering something other than termination, Michael said cautiously. But Vanessa, you need to be prepared for any outcome. And if they do offer you any alternative to termination, my advice is to accept it immediately and express genuine remorse. I am remorseful, Vanessa said quietly, surprising herself with how true the statement felt. Her conversations with her sister had forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about her behavior and attitudes. I really am. Then make sure they know that, Michael advised. Not with excuses or defensiveness, but with honest acknowledgement of the harm caused and a commitment to do better. That evening, Vanessa prepared meticulously for the meeting. She chose a conservative suit, practiced what she would say, and tried to prepare herself mentally for the likely end of her aviation career. Meanwhile, Raymond also prepared, reviewing his notes one final time before heading home to his family. Tomorrow would be a test of his leadership philosophy and his commitment to creating meaningful change rather than simply punishing wrongdoing. The next morning, the Skyline headquarters conference room held an atmosphere of tense anticipation. Raymond sat at the head of the table, flanked by Patricia Morgan from HR and David Chen, who had flown in specifically for this meeting. Gabriella Santos sat across from them, reviewing her notes. At precisely 10 a.m., Vanessa Lewis entered, followed by her lawyer. She looked pale but composed, her hands clasped tightly to prevent them from shaking visibly. Ms. Lewis, Mr. Green, thank you for coming, Raymond began formally. Please, have a seat. As they settled into their chairs, Raymond continued, before we proceed with our decision, I'd like to give Ms. Lewis an opportunity to speak, if she wishes to do so. Vanessa glanced at her lawyer, who nodded encouragingly. She took a deep breath and faced the group. First, I want to thank you for this opportunity, she began, her voice steadier than she'd expected. What I did was wrong. Not just the actions themselves, but the thinking behind them. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I've spent this week really examining my behavior, not just on that flight but throughout my career and life. I realized that I've been carrying biases I didn't even recognize, assumptions about who belongs in certain spaces, who deserves priority attention. Her voice cracked slightly, but she continued, I can't undo what happened, and I understand if Skyline needs to terminate my employment. But I want you to know that this experience has fundamentally changed how I see myself and others. Whatever happens today, I'm committed to addressing these biases and becoming better. The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. Raymond studied her carefully, noting the absence of the defensiveness she'd displayed during their first confrontation. "Thank you for those words, Ms. Lewis," Raymond said after a moment. "They demonstrate a level of self-reflection that is essential for growth." He opened a folder in front of him. "The investigation into the incident on Flight SL-347 has concluded. The findings are clear and unambiguous. Your actions violated Skyline's non-discrimination policies and constituted biased treatment based on race." Vanessa nodded, accepting the assessment without protest. Under normal circumstances, Raymond continued, these findings would result in immediate termination, as recommended by HR. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly, preparing herself for the inevitable. However, Raymond said, causing her eyes to snap open again, "I am authorizing an alternative course of action." He slid a document across the table. "This is a conditional retention agreement. Instead of termination, you will be suspended without pay for 1 month, during which time you will complete our comprehensive bias training program." Vanessa stared at the document in disbelief. "Upon successful completion of that training," Raymond continued, "you will not return to your flight attendant position. Instead, you will join our newly expanded diversity training team, working directly with Ms. Santos." Gabriella leaned forward. "Your experience, both the incident itself and your journey since then, will become a teaching case for all employees. Your first-hand account of recognizing and addressing bias would be powerful for others going through similar journeys." Vanessa's lawyer looked as stunned as she felt. "You're offering her a position on the diversity training team," he clarified. Conditionally, Raymond emphasized. "This agreement includes strict requirements, completion of the training program, ongoing education, regular evaluations, and a 6-month probationary period. Any failure to meet these standards would result in immediate termination." He looked directly at Vanessa. "This isn't an easy path, Ms. Lewis. In many ways, it's more challenging than termination would be. You'll need to confront your biases publicly, help others recognize their own, and become a visible example of both the problem and the potential for change." "Why?" Vanessa asked, finding her voice. "Why would you offer this instead of just firing me?" "Because firing you would end the conversation," Raymond replied simply. "It would satisfy calls for justice but wouldn't create lasting change. What happened between us was deeply problematic, but it also represents an opportunity, a chance to transform an incident of discrimination into a catalyst for genuine growth, not just for you but for our entire organization." Vanessa looked down at the agreement, then back at Raymond. "I don't deserve this second chance," she said honestly. "This isn't about what you deserve," Raymond clarified. "It's about what will create the most meaningful impact. The question is, are you willing to do the difficult work this path requires?" Without hesitation, Vanessa nodded. "Yes," she said firmly. "Absolutely yes." As she signed the agreement, Vanessa felt something she hadn't expected, not just relief at keeping her job, but a genuine sense of purpose. This wasn't merely a reprieve, it was an opportunity to transform her greatest mistake into something meaningful. Raymond watched her sign, knowing he'd made an unconventional choice. Only time would tell if this decision would truly create the change he envisioned, not just for Vanessa Lewis, but for Skyline Airlines and perhaps the industry as a whole. 6 weeks after the incident that had changed both their lives, Raymond Jackson and Vanessa Lewis sat across from each other in a small conference room at Skyline's training center. Between them lay Vanessa's completed assessment from the intensive bias training program she'd undergone during her suspension. "Your evaluation scores are impressive," Raymond noted, reviewing the final report. "Dr. Winters says you've shown exceptional commitment to the process." Vanessa nodded, still finding it somewhat surreal to be having a civil conversation with the man she'd so callously mistreated. "The program was challenging," she admitted. "There were moments when I wanted to give up, to fall back into defensiveness. But each time I remembered what was at stake. Not just my job, but the opportunity to be part of meaningful change. Patricia Morgan from HR and Gabriela Santos joined them, along with David Chen, who had been instrumental in restructuring the flight crew training protocols following the incident. "Today marks the official transition," Gabriela explained, distributing folders to everyone present. "Vanessa has completed her suspension and training requirements. Now we need to determine how to best incorporate her experience into our broader diversity initiative." Raymond opened his folder, which contained the framework for what they had been calling the Transformation Project, a comprehensive approach to addressing bias throughout Skyline's operations. "Vanessa," he said, "we've developed this framework based on the data we've gathered over the past year. But what we're missing is the personal element. The perspective of someone who has confronted their own biases directly." Vanessa straightened in her chair, understanding the significance of what was being asked of her. "You want me to share my story as part of the training?" "Only if you're willing," Gabriela clarified. "This goes beyond your personal experience with Raymond. We'd want you to discuss the thought patterns behind your actions, how you justified them to yourself, and the journey you've been on since then." Vanessa took a deep breath. "When I first signed the agreement, I thought the hardest part would be admitting I was wrong," she confessed. "But what I've learned through the training is that acknowledging the mistake was just the beginning. The real work has been examining the underlying beliefs that made those actions seem acceptable to me at the time." She looked directly at Raymond. "I'm not the same person who refused you water on that flight. The biases I had, they didn't disappear overnight, and I still catch myself sometimes. But now I recognize them for what they are, and I have tools to challenge them." Raymond nodded, appreciating her honesty. "That's exactly the kind of insight that could benefit others. Many people in our organization would never openly admit to harboring biases, but they make decisions based on them every day." "I'll do it," Vanessa said with conviction. "If sharing my story helps prevent someone else from making the same mistakes, then something positive will have come from my failure." Gabriela smiled. "We'll start with the flight attendant training groups next week. We've developed an anonymized case study based on the incident, but having you there to provide the personal perspective will make it much more impactful." "Actually," Vanessa interjected, "I'd prefer not to be anonymized. Using my real name and taking full ownership of what happened, that's part of my accountability." Raymond studied her with new respect. "That takes courage, Vanessa." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," she confirmed. Hiding behind anonymity would undermine the message. Real change requires real honesty. David Chen, who had initially advocated for Vanessa's termination, seemed impressed by her transformation. "The training curriculum you'll be part of is being implemented across all departments," he explained. "Every employee, from baggage handlers to executives, will participate. Including me," Raymond added. "None of us is immune to bias, myself included. This initiative isn't about pointing fingers at bad people, it's about recognizing that these are human tendencies we all need to consciously address." As the meeting continued, they outlined the specific role Vanessa would play in the training program. She would work directly with Gabriela's team, helping to facilitate discussions and sharing her personal journey as a cautionary tale and a story of growth. "There's one more thing," Raymond said as the meeting drew to a close. "Next month, I'll be presenting our diversity initiative at the National Aviation Conference. I'd like you to consider joining the presentation team, Vanessa." She looked stunned. "You want me to speak at a national conference? About what happened?" "About what happened afterward," Raymond clarified. "About the process of confronting bias and creating institutional change. Your perspective would add tremendous value to the presentation." Vanessa felt a wave of emotion wash over her. From nearly losing her career to being invited to represent the company at a national conference, the journey had been extraordinary. "I would be honored," she said quietly. "Though I admit, the idea of speaking publicly about my failures is terrifying." "Courage isn't the absence of fear," Raymond reminded her. "It's moving forward despite it. As they concluded the meeting, Raymond and Vanessa found themselves alone in the conference room for a moment. The tension that had characterized their early interactions had been replaced by something unexpected, a cautious professional respect. "I need to thank you," Vanessa said seriously. "Not just for the second chance, but for pushing me to become better rather than simply punishing me for being wrong." Raymond considered her words. "You know, when I was deciding what to do about your case, many people advised me to make an example of you through termination. They argued it would send a strong message about zero tolerance for discrimination. Why didn't you?" Vanessa asked. "Because zero tolerance isn't the same as zero growth," Raymond explained. "Firing you would have been a statement, but it wouldn't have created change. What we're doing now, that has the potential to transform not just one career, but an entire culture." As they left the conference room, both recognized that their unlikely professional relationship had become something neither could have imagined on that flight 6 weeks ago. A partnership dedicated to turning a moment of discrimination into a movement for lasting change. 6 months after the water incident that had nearly ended her career, Vanessa Lewis stood before a group of 30 flight attendants in Skyline's primary training facility. The room was silent as she concluded her presentation. "I didn't see myself as biased," she told them, her voice steady and clear. "I saw myself as efficient, as prioritizing certain passengers because they seemed more important. But what criteria was I using to determine importance? Appearance? Clothing? Race? I never consciously acknowledged those factors, but my actions revealed the truth." She advanced to the final slide, which showed the Skyline customer service metrics from the past quarter. Passenger satisfaction scores had increased across all demographic groups. "The training program you're participating in isn't about making you feel guilty or labeling anyone as racist," Vanessa continued. "It's about recognizing that we all carry unconscious biases that affect our decisions and behaviors. Becoming aware of them is the first step toward ensuring they don't control how we treat the people we serve." As the presentation concluded and the flight attendants broke into discussion groups, the training room door opened quietly. Raymond Jackson slipped in, nodding encouragingly to Vanessa as he took a seat at the back of the room. Gabriela Santos joined him, clipboard in hand. "That's the 5th group this month," she whispered. "Her story has more impact than any training video we could have created." Raymond watched as Vanessa moved between the discussion tables, answering questions and facilitating conversations with confidence and humility. "The numbers support that," he agreed. "Complaint rates for discriminatory treatment are down 28% across all routes. Employee engagement with the diversity training has increased by 40% since we incorporated Vanessa's testimony." "It's remarkable," Gabriela admitted. "When you first proposed this alternative to termination, I supported it but had my doubts. I never expected such a complete transformation." After the training session concluded, Raymond approached Vanessa as she gathered her materials. "That was excellent," he said. "Especially the way you handled the question about intent versus impact." Vanessa smiled, still somewhat surprised by the positive working relationship they had developed. "It's the question I struggled with most myself," she admitted. "Understanding that my lack of negative intent didn't negate the harmful impact of my actions." "The conference presentation is next week," Raymond reminded her. "Are you ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Vanessa replied. "Though I still find it surreal that I'll be presenting alongside you at the industry's largest event." "Your journey is powerful precisely because it's authentic," Raymond assured her. "It demonstrates that meaningful change is possible, both individually and institutionally." The following week, Raymond and Vanessa found themselves in Chicago, preparing to present Skyline's diversity initiative to over 500 industry professionals at the National Aviation Conference. Their session, titled "From Incident to Institutional Change, Transforming Bias into Opportunity," was one of the most anticipated on the program. As they waited backstage, Vanessa fidgeted nervously with her presentation notes. "What if they just see me as the racist flight attendant?" she whispered anxiously. "They'll see what you show them," Raymond replied calmly. A professional who made a mistake, owned it completely, and transformed it into an opportunity for growth. That takes more courage than most people ever display in their entire careers. When they took the stage, Raymond began by outlining the comprehensive changes Skyline had implemented, the revised hiring practices that had increased crew diversity by 17%, the anonymous customer experience audits that identified service disparities, the accountability metrics that tied management bonuses to equity outcomes. Then he introduced Vanessa, stepping aside as she shared her personal journey from discrimination to awareness to advocacy. The easiest path would have been termination, she told the audience. For the company to fire me and move on. For me to play the victim, blame the system, or make excuses. But the harder path, of confronting bias directly, of using failure as a catalyst for change, has created transformation that extends far beyond one incident or one employee. The impact was palpable. As they concluded their presentation, the audience rose in a standing ovation. What had begun as a case study in discrimination had become a model for institutional transformation. In the months that followed, Skyline's approach gained national attention. Other airlines began implementing similar programs. Raymond received an Industry Leadership Award for innovative management practices. Vanessa was profiled in Business Week as the face of corporate transformation. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came 1 year after the original incident, when Raymond found himself on another Skyline flight, this time as an anonymous passenger conducting one of the random service audits he'd instituted. Vanessa happened to be working that flight as part of her ongoing training role, demonstrating best practices to a new flight attendant. She didn't notice Raymond, seated in economy this time, as she moved through the cabin. What Raymond observed was remarkable. Vanessa's interactions with every passenger were equally attentive and respectful, regardless of their appearance, seating assignment, or race. When an elderly black woman requested assistance with her bag, Vanessa responded with the same warmth and efficiency she showed to the white businessman across the aisle. It wasn't perfect, no person or organization ever is, but it was genuine progress. The incident that could have ended a career and reinforced institutional barriers had instead sparked a movement toward greater awareness and equity. As Raymond completed his anonymous audit form, giving the flight crew perfect scores, he reflected on the choice he'd made a year earlier. By choosing accountability over punishment, transformation over termination, he'd not only changed the trajectory of Vanessa's career but had helped create a model for how organizations could address bias more effectively. The water incident, as it had come to be known throughout Skyline, had transformed from a moment of discrimination into a catalyst for change that rippled far beyond one flight attendant, one passenger, or even one airline. What do you think about Raymond's decision to transform a negative experience into positive change instead of simply punishing Vanessa? Would you have made the same choice in his position? Comment below with your thoughts on whether accountability or punishment creates more lasting change. Like this video if you believe in second chances and the possibility of genuine transformation. Subscribe for more powerful true stories about overcoming discrimination and creating positive change. And share this video with someone who might need to be reminded that our worst mistakes don't have to define us, they can become the foundation for our greatest growth. Thank you for watching, and remember, real change begins with the courage to confront our own biases. This story teaches us that true transformation comes not from punishment alone, but from accountability coupled with opportunity for growth. Raymond could have simply fired Vanessa, satisfying calls for justice but missing a chance for deeper change. Instead, his decision to create a path for her redemption transformed not just one career but an entire organization's approach to bias. The most powerful changes often begin with uncomfortable truths. Vanessa had to confront her unconscious biases before she could overcome them. Her journey reminds us that we all carry prejudices we may not recognize. Assumptions about who belongs in certain spaces or deserves priority treatment. Acknowledging these biases is the first step toward eliminating their influence over our actions. Perhaps most importantly, this story demonstrates that our worst mistakes don't have to define us. They can become catalysts for our greatest growth. By choosing accountability over defensiveness, Vanessa transformed her failure into an opportunity to help others recognize and address their own biases. In a world often quick to condemn and slow to forgive, Raymond's leadership shows how giving someone the chance to learn from their mistakes can create ripples of positive change far beyond one incident or individual. What unconscious biases might be influencing your own interactions with others? Have you ever experienced discrimination or witnessed it happening to someone else? Share your story in the comments below to continue this important conversation. If this story made you reflect on your own attitudes or behaviors, hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful narratives that challenge us to become better humans. Help spread awareness by sharing this video with someone who might benefit from its message of transformation and growth. Thank you for joining us on this journey toward greater understanding and compassion. Remember, real change begins within each of us, one interaction at a time.